And now let's dive into templating, because templating will be the most important thing, I would say, for you to succeed with project management in Autotask/Proxuma. Um, we at Different truly believe that everything you do, if you implement it into a template, that you continuously improve, gain efficiency, and make sure that the next project is a little bit better than the previous one. So all of that knowledge that you have within your organization, that each individual has, that if you implement it into a template, it will help you. So I'm going to talk quite some time about this. The first thing is that we work with master project templates, but it's not mandatory to do it. You can also create a template for each single project. Both options have some benefits and some downsides, but we would like to work with a master project template because of efficiency, right? Because each project has some standard stuff, like administrative stuff you need to prepare. Maybe you need to create that design that we just talked about in the drawing. Um, you need to deliver. You need to transfer all of the knowledge to support, and maybe there's additional work, right? So all of these phases that I just quickly selected are maybe 90% or more the same across each project. So why not add all of that into the same project? Because if you do that continuous improvement where I talked about, you are, I don't know, maybe tweaking your template multiple times a week, or even daily, like changing maybe a date, or maybe adding a checklist item, or redefining the hours or dependencies whatsoever. So if you, for example, have 10 templates and you need to change something in the general part, yeah, you need to do it a lot of times, and that's quite annoying. So that's why we advise a master project template, because you can basically just select phases when you are creating a project from the template when you are actually creating it. So you only select the ones that you actually need, and that way you still have your custom template. Um, and if you do it as we advise you to, then you need to do these predecessors, because the predecessors, they make sure that your template is dynamic and a variable depending on how you set it up. Um, as you can see here, for example, you can relate to a phase, or you can relate to a task, and you can relate to more phases and tasks. For example, here on the final delivery and the training and adoption, I relate it to every possible implementation project there is, because if you only select one, it will still work and it will auto-compile your start and end dates and make sure that there are no unintended gaps. So just for the template alone, I would advise you to use these predecessors. Of course, predecessors have a general functionality that for each project will work, right? If you move a parent later, then the child's also move. So if you have any delay, or maybe when you're doing the high level planning, which I still need to get back to, I remember, so I'll do that after I finish this topic. Um, so yeah, when you move something, everything else moves along, and that's why predecessors are important. And the lag days basically means how big of a gap does there need to be in between the task end date and the new task start date. So if it's 0, it perfectly aligns, and else there's a gap. Um, yeah, I forgot to talk about the planning. So let me first do that and then go back to the template. So it's not a big drawing. It's try to keep it as simple as possible. But yeah, basically starts off with a project task or a ticket with the status to plan or any equivalent. Then the person needs to, of course, know what to do. So preferably there's some kind of planning instruction specifically here for tickets. If somebody else is planning the work other than the one who's actually doing the work, then it's important to know what to plan, right? So you need some kind of instruction. You need to determine the resources based, for example, on skills or competences or whatever how you would like to do it. Then in case of a project, you need to create a concept planning, and that is the high level planning which I talked about, where you plan your tasks and phases. Basically, you do tasks and then phases are automatically planned. But you first define with big blocks of work when it needs to be done in which area. Again, not on specific dates. For example, if you need to plan some 8 hours of work, you don't do it. No, you need to do this on Monday because that is not really flexible. You tell it, for example, it needs to be done in the first few days of week one or week one. Um, because then you're a little bit more flexible and then eventually you can do the detailed planning. Because you first need to create this concept and determine if the planning will fit. You can do this internally, but also with the client. And that is another benefit, by the way, of working with project proposals and Proxuma, is that if you plan that out in the sales phase, you can actually show the client, will this work? And maybe that's a step too far, but it's something you can work towards. So when you've done that concept planning, you can plan your critical path or the critical tasks first with service calls. And in Proxuma, you can set it up in a way that if you plan something, the status will automatically be changed, for example, to planned. So you first do the critical path planning. When that is done, you can plan the rest with service calls. I will show you later in this video how to do that efficiently in Proxuma. Then when the work is done by the engineer, they can just close the task. When it's not fully done, or maybe not done at all, you need to replan it. So the engineer in question can just put the status back onto plan, give a note on why it needs to be replanned or why it needs to be planned again. And there is a difference between those two. Um, so the planner or the project manager can plan it, or maybe the person itself can do it themselves, depending on how you want to work. But there is a difference between planning it again, so I did my work but I didn't finish it, or I was not able to do it, so then you move the service call to the next date. And why is the difference? Is because if you look back into history about capacity, for example, planned work, actual work, then yeah, that one is relevant. So yeah, that's the planning of a project. For a ticket, it's more simple, but it follows the same structure. It just skips some steps, and other people are involved. So yeah, now let me go back to the template again. So yeah, we talked about the predecessors, but first let's talk about what is a phase and what is a task and what is a checklist item. Well, a phase is just a group of tasks. It could also be a logical distinction between one and the other. For example, what we like to do is make a distinction between preparation and the actual realization slash implementation, and then so yeah, that's the first thing. You can logically cut your project up in blocks. The second thing is that a task, um, how big is a task and where's the cutoff point between tasks and checklists? And that one is not there's not a golden rule for it. Um, and it's something that you need to decide, but we definitely don't advise you to create tasks for 15 minutes of work, because that will create a long list that you need to plan. It would also mean that your engineers have to enter time on those small blocks of work, and they don't do that. They don't want to do it. Like project engineers, they probably want to just say 8 hours of work on a specific day. That might be a little bit too much, and you could cut it up into smaller ones. Um, but yeah, you need to define exact policy for this yourself. But I would say don't create tasks lower than an hour usually. And if it's more than, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days, you might want to just create separate tasks for it. In general, I like to just keep work within a week. But yeah, that's me. Um, and everything else is a checklist item. Those are the things you should not forget, or you should always do, or you should always comply to. So those are checklists. Make sure that you deliver the right quality. Things are not forgotten. Um, and checklists are ease of use, and those can be added into each single task, and those can be maintained on a task in a project template. I just advise you to directly add checklists into tasks and not reuse, for example, checklist libraries, because if you change a library checklist, you need to do the same thing on the project anyway. So that's again something you can do. The next step is to map a task or a phase or some tasks to your documentation system, for example, IT Glue. Why is because if you implement a service, there should be the baseline of how you implement it, right? Which is the default configuration, which things are need to be done in a specific way, where can you maybe customize freely, where can't you customize and you need to comply, for example, to your golden template or of your Microsoft tenant. So yeah, that everything of that is more details, and that is in an SOP or a configuration document or a template or whatever how you would like to call it for a specific item. So what you can do is you can create a task URL. You can also do it in a task directly in the template. So if you know that from the start, you can simply add attachment with type URL and then just simply add the URL. I don't advise you to just add documents as attachments, but rather work with a URL to your documentation management system. So yeah, that's the next step. Let's talk about estimated hours, because those, as highlighted before, are important because they determine the general amount of time needed for a specific task. And yes, every client is different, and yes, every project is different, and maybe some items take a little bit more or less compared to what is put into the estimated hours. For example, if you are configuring servers, maybe there's a lot of servers and it's way more than 24 hours. I mean, that is of course when you have to decide in the sales phase, and then you can update these estimated hours. Because based on those estimated hours, there's a lot of knowledge to be gained. You can at first see, based on estimated hours, how many hours do I need to plan, right, with those service calls. Then when everything is planned, or maybe not, you see how much is left to be planned. Then you can see the actual hours, and I'll show you in Proxuma. You can see the actual hours on, and see if you go over budget or you stay under budget, and you can do that for each task, but each phase, and also on the entire project, or even bigger.